On a scorching August morning in 1914, the gravediggers at Cedar Hill Cemetery outside Dallas made a discovery that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Inside the coffin of 16-year-old Lily Hartwell, who had supposedly died of consumption 3 days earlier, they found scratch marks carved deep into the wooden lid from the inside. Her fingernails were worn down to bloody stumps, and her face was frozen in a silent scream. But the most chilling detail was what the coroner found clutched in her right hand, a note written in her own blood that read, "I told them I wasn't dead. I told them I could hear everything. But Papa said the sickness would spread if we waited. He said God would forgive us for what we had to do." The Hartwell family had been pillars of the Cedar Hill community for 2 generations. Daniel Hartwell owned the largest cotton farm in the county, and his wife Martha was known for her charity work and devout faith. Their 3 children were the pride of their small Texas town: James, 22 and preparing to take over the farm; Benjamin, 19 and studying to become a minister; and Lily, 16 and considered the most beautiful girl in 3 counties. But in the summer of 1914, consumption came to Cedar Hill like a plague, claiming lives faster than the town's single doctor could treat them. The disease spread through families with ruthless efficiency, leaving behind a trail of wasted bodies and grief-stricken survivors. When Lily began coughing blood in July, the entire family knew what it meant. Consumption was a death sentence in rural Texas, where medical care was limited and isolation was often the only treatment available. Daniel made the difficult decision to quarantine his daughter in the family's old servant quarters, a small building behind the main house where she could be cared for without exposing the rest of the family. Martha tended to Lily around the clock, bringing her food and medicine while wearing a cloth mask that provided little real protection. She watched her beautiful daughter waste away day by day, her skin growing pale and her breathing becoming increasingly labored. But Lily fought the disease with a determination that amazed everyone who knew her. Even as her body weakened, her spirit remained strong. She insisted she would recover, that God wouldn't take her so young, that she had too much life left to live. "I'm not dying, Mama," Lily whispered through her coughing fits. "I can feel myself getting stronger. The fever is breaking. I'm going to be fine." Martha wanted to believe her daughter, but the signs were unmistakable. Lily's weight had dropped dramatically. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, and the telltale flush of consumption colored her cheeks. Dr. Patterson, the town's elderly physician, confirmed what the family already knew. "She has days at most," he told Daniel privately. "Make your peace with her while you can. And for God's sake, don't let anyone else get close to her. This strain of consumption is particularly virulent." On August 15th, Lily appeared to take a turn for the worse. Her breathing became so faint that Martha had to hold a mirror to her daughter's lips to detect any sign of life. Her pulse was barely perceptible, and her skin had taken on the waxy pallor that preceded death. Daniel called Dr. Patterson, who examined Lily carefully before making his pronouncement. "She's gone," the doctor said solemnly. "I'm sorry for your loss. We should prepare for burial immediately, given the contagious nature of her illness." But as they prepared to move Lily's body, Martha noticed something that made her heart race with hope. "Wait," she called out. "I think I saw her eyelid flutter." "Look closer. I think she might still be breathing." Dr. Patterson examined Lily again, pressing his ear to her chest and holding his hand over her mouth. After several long minutes, he shook his head. "I understand how difficult this is to accept, Mrs. Hartwell, but your daughter has passed. Sometimes the recently deceased can appear to move due to settling of the body. What you saw was likely just that." Daniel, desperate to prevent the spread of disease to his remaining family members, insisted they proceed with immediate burial. The Texas heat made it dangerous to delay, and other families in the county had already lost multiple members to the same strain of consumption. "We can't risk waiting," he told his wife firmly. "James and Benjamin are already showing signs of cough. If we delay the burial, we could lose all our children." Martha begged for more time, insisting she had seen signs of life in Lily, but Daniel overruled her concerns. The family prepared for a hasty funeral. with the burial scheduled for the next morning to minimize exposure to the community. Lily was dressed in her finest white dress and placed in a simple pine coffin that Daniel had built himself. The funeral service was brief, attended only by immediate family members, and conducted by Benjamin, who read scripture while fighting back tears. As they lowered the coffin into the ground, Martha swore she heard a faint sound coming from inside the wooden box, a soft scratching, like fingernails against wood. "Stop!" she cried out, grabbing Daniel's arm. "Do you hear that? She's alive in there. She's trying to get out." Daniel listened carefully but heard nothing except the wind through the cemetery trees. Dr. Patterson, who had attended the burial to ensure proper procedures were followed, assured the family that what Martha heard was likely just the settling of the coffin or the sound of dirt hitting the wooden lid. "Grief can make us hear things that aren't there," he said gently. "Your daughter is at peace now. Let her rest." Against Martha's desperate protests, they finished filling the grave. But as the last shovelful of earth was placed over the coffin, everyone present heard a sound that would haunt them forever. A clear, unmistakable pounding coming from beneath the ground. "She's alive!" Martha screamed, falling to her knees and clawing at the fresh dirt with her bare hands. "My baby is alive down there!" The men stood frozen, unsure whether to believe what they were hearing or trust the doctor's assurance that Lily was dead. The pounding continued for several minutes, growing more frantic and desperate, before finally falling silent. Daniel faced an impossible choice. If they dug up the coffin and Lily was indeed dead, they would have desecrated her grave and exposed themselves to additional risk of infection. But if she was alive, and they did nothing, they would be guilty of the most unthinkable crime imaginable. "She's gone, Doctor," Patterson insisted. "What you're hearing is gas escaping from the body, or the wood settling under the weight of the soil. This is not uncommon in recent burials." Daniel chose to trust the doctor's expertise over his wife's maternal instincts. They left the cemetery with Martha sobbing and begging them to return, while Daniel convinced himself that they had done the right thing under impossible circumstances. That night, Martha sat by her bedroom window, staring out at the cemetery in the distance. Around midnight, she swore she saw a pale figure moving among the headstones, calling out in a voice that sounded like Lily's. But when she woke Daniel and insisted they investigate, they found the cemetery empty and undisturbed. The doctor had given Martha laudanum to help her sleep, and Daniel assumed the medication was causing hallucinations. For 3 days, Martha reported seeing and hearing her daughter around the property. Lily's voice calling for help from the direction of the cemetery. A figure in a white dress standing at the edge of the cotton fields. Scratching sounds coming from the walls of the house, as if someone was trying to claw their way inside. Daniel and his sons dismissed these reports as manifestations of grief and guilt. But other neighbors began reporting similar experiences. Children claimed to see a pale girl in white wandering the roads at night. Dogs barked frantically in the direction of the cemetery. Several families reported hearing desperate scratching sounds coming from their own walls and foundations. If you're gripped by this horrifying tale of a family's impossible choice and its supernatural consequences, make sure to subscribe for more stories that explore the terrifying intersection of medicine, faith, and the unknown. What the gravediggers discovered next would force an entire community to confront the unthinkable truth about what they had done. On the 4th day after the burial, cemetery workers arrived to dig a grave for another consumption victim. As they worked near Lily's plot, they heard sounds that made them stop their digging and listen carefully. Scratching, coming from beneath the ground, directly over Lily's grave. The workers reported their findings to the sheriff, who reluctantly agreed to investigate. When they opened the coffin, they found evidence that confirmed Martha's worst fears and revealed the full horror of what the family had done. Lily had indeed been alive when they buried her. The scratches on the coffin lid told the story of her desperate attempts to escape. Her fingernails were worn down to bleeding stumps from clawing at the wood. Her face was contorted in an expression of terror and suffocation. But most damning of all was the note found clutched in her hand, written in her own blood. "I told them I wasn't dead. I told them I could hear everything, But Papa said the sickness would spread if we waited. He said God would forgive us for what we had to do. The revelation destroyed the Hartwell family and shook the entire community to its core. Daniel was arrested and charged with murder, though the charges were eventually dropped when Dr. Patterson testified that he had pronounced Lily dead and recommended immediate burial. Martha suffered a complete mental breakdown and was committed to the state asylum, where she spent her remaining years insisting that Lily visited her nightly to forgive her for not fighting harder to save her life. James and Benjamin left Cedar Hill immediately after the discovery, unable to bear the weight of their community's judgment and their own guilt. Both died young. James in a farming accident that neighbors whispered was suicide, and Benjamin in a train derailment while traveling to a distant ministry assignment. But the story didn't end with the destruction of the Hartwell family. Lily's presence seemed to linger in Cedar Hill, growing stronger rather than weaker as time passed. The cemetery workers who had discovered her body reported that her grave would not stay filled. No matter how much dirt they shoveled over the coffin, they would return the next morning to find the earth disturbed and scattered, as if someone had been digging from below. Local children began disappearing for hours at a time, only to be found wandering near the cemetery with no memory of how they had gotten there. They spoke of a beautiful girl in white who had shown them how to dig with their hands and promised to teach them about the darkness underground. Dr. Patterson, consumed by guilt over his misdiagnosis, began drinking heavily and telling anyone who would listen that medical science was inadequate to determine true death. He started performing increasingly elaborate tests on his deceased patients, terrified of making the same mistake twice. "How can we know?" he would mutter while examining bodies. "How can we ever really know if they're gone?" The doctor's obsession with preventing premature burial led him to develop increasingly bizarre procedures. He would wait days before pronouncing death, performing painful tests on unconscious patients to ensure they were truly beyond help. His reputation suffered as word spread of his erratic behavior, but he couldn't stop himself from seeing Lily's terrified face in every patient he examined. The consumption epidemic that had prompted Lily's hasty burial continued to ravage Cedar Hill, but now families faced an impossible dilemma. They could follow medical advice and risk burying their loved ones alive, or they could wait and risk spreading the disease to other family members. Several families chose to wait, keeping their sick relatives at home far longer than Dr. Patterson recommended. In some cases, patients who appeared to be dying made miraculous recoveries. But in others, the delay allowed the disease to spread through entire households, wiping out families who might have survived if they had acted more quickly. The fear of premature burial became as strong as the fear of consumption itself. Families began insisting on extended wakes, sometimes keeping bodies in their homes for a week or more to ensure there were no signs of life. The summer heat made this practice dangerous and unpleasant, but many considered it preferable to the alternative. Lily's case had revealed a terrible truth about the limitations of medical knowledge in 1914. Doctors could make mistakes, death could be misdiagnosed, and the consequences of those errors could be unthinkable. But Lily's spirit seemed determined to ensure that no one else would suffer her fate. Families throughout the county reported visits from a pale girl who warned them about the dangers of hasty burial. She appeared to parents keeping vigil over sick children, urging them to wait, to watch, to listen for any sign of life. "Don't let them bury you too soon," she would whisper. "Death isn't always what it seems. Sometimes we're just sleeping very deeply." The sightings became so common that many families began leaving food and water beside the beds of their apparently deceased relatives, just in case Lily's warnings were accurate. Some claimed their loved ones stirred at the smell of food, confirming that consciousness could persist even when all other signs of life had disappeared. Dr. Patterson's guilt eventually drove him to suicide, but not before he had documented dozens of cases where patients had shown signs of life after being pronounced dead. His journal, discovered after his death, revealed the true scope of medical uncertainty surrounding death determination in the early 20th century. "We are practicing medicine in darkness," he wrote in his final entry. "Lily Hartwell taught me that death is not a simple binary state, but a complex process that we understand poorly. How many others have we buried alive? How many more will suffer the same fate because we are too proud to admit our ignorance? The town eventually erected a memorial to Lily in the cemetery, not far from her original grave. The inscription read, "In memory of Lily Hartwell, who taught us that death comes only when the spirit is ready to depart, not when the body appears to fail." But the memorial couldn't contain Lily's restless spirit. Reports of her presence continued for decades, and many credited her with saving lives by warning families about premature burial. Medical practices in the area began to change, with doctors adopting more cautious approaches to death determination. Some families started requesting that small bells be attached to coffins, connected by strings to the hands of the deceased. If someone was buried alive, they could ring the bell and alert cemetery workers to their plight. The practice became so common that Cedar Hill Cemetery hired a night watchman specifically to listen for the sound of underground bells. Lily's story spread beyond Texas, contributing to growing awareness of the dangers of premature burial. Medical journals began publishing articles about proper death determination procedures, and funeral homes started offering extended viewing periods to give families more time to watch for signs of life. But in Cedar Hill, Lily's presence remained strongest. Children growing up in the area learned to recognize her warning signs: the sudden drop in temperature, the sound of scratching in the walls, the pale figure that appeared when someone was in danger of being buried too soon. "Listen to Lily" became a common saying among local families dealing with serious illness. If she comes to visit, it means you need to wait a little longer. The Hartwell property was eventually abandoned and fell into ruin. But the old servant quarters where Lily had been quarantined became a pilgrimage site for families seeking guidance about their sick relatives. They would leave flowers and notes asking for Lily's protection, begging her to watch over their loved ones and prevent the kind of tragedy that had befallen her own family. Local folklore claimed that Lily could still be seen on summer nights, walking the rows of the old cotton fields in her white burial dress. She was searching, people said, for families who needed her warning about the dangers of hasty burial. Her presence had become a blessing rather than a curse, a guardian spirit protecting others from the fate she had suffered. But Lily's story also served as a reminder of how quickly love could turn to horror when fear overruled compassion. The Hartwell family had believed they were protecting their surviving children by burying Lily quickly. Instead, they had committed an act that destroyed their entire bloodline and left a permanent scar on their community. The cemetery where Lily was buried became known as one of the most haunted places in Texas, but it was a peaceful kind of haunting. Visitors reported feeling watched but protected, as if someone was looking out for their welfare rather than trying to harm them. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the air was still and heavy with the scent of cotton blossoms, you could hear a young woman's voice carrying across the fields, not crying or moaning in pain, but calling out with urgent love to anyone who might be listening. "Wait," the voice would say. "Please wait. Don't let them bury you too soon. I'm here to help you know when it's really time to go." The question isn't whether Lily Hartwell really returned from the grave to protect others from premature burial. The question is whether you would have the courage to wait, to watch, to listen for signs of life when every expert tells you that hope is gone and time is.